Hey beautiful. Have you considered subscribing to our channel? It helps us make quality content for you. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
The conclave chamber shimmered in ultraviolet light as the crystalline ceiling above refracted the glow of the twin suns beyond the station hull. 72 delegates sat in rows that spiraled upward in circular tiers, their faces obscured behind. Cultural masks, headdresses, and ambient holographic fields. Silence fell as Grand Arbitrator Zorvel of the Valari Ascendancy rose from his suspension disc, his luminous tentacles unfurling behind him like a fan of glass blades. The vote is now in session. Shall the Terran species be classified as Class Omega labor unit effective immediately? All votes must be registered within one orbital rotation. Begin. He sat once more, his voice echoing still across the chamber like the toll of a funerary bell. There was no debate today. There had been no resistance in committee. Earth's rapid development had rattled too many powers too quickly. In less than 3 centuries, they had broken the light barrier, built autonomous war fleets, and colonized half their system. Worse, they had done it without asking permission. War Marshal Drokar of the Mirek Imperium struck the surface before him with his war claw. A single heavy knock, the signal of ascent. His gnarled face, half hidden behind a ceremonial predator mask, remained motionless. The Mirek knew strength and feared little, but humans were different, unpredictable, reckless, somehow relentless. The rest followed. A chorus of affirmation echoed through the conclave. Glowing sigils and neural codes transmitted into the vote matrix. No abstentions, no objections. A perfect, unanimous judgment. Grand Arbitrator Zorvel's voice cut through again. Resolution Conclave 72. Order 49, Species Terra, subject to containment, occupation, and extraction. Resources, biological, intellectual, and reproductive, to be reappropriated for galactic welfare. A soft chime. The decree sealed. Earth would fall, it did. The war was swift. Precision strikes, orbital bombardment, super plagues laced with quantum decay, artificial famines, Terran governments fractured and folded, satellites burned, oceans boiled, cities silenced. The screams were not heard beyond their orbit. That had been the plan. In a mere 12 cycles, Earth lay quiet. The remains of humanity herded into containment zones across orbital colonies and converted industrial vessels. Entire generations erased in days. In the dark heart of Valari-controlled space, a transport vessel, the Vosari drift cut silently through the void. Its contents classified even to Mirek command. On board were 973 biologicals, all human. Among them was one labeled Specimen X-943. He had no name, no voice, no reactions, no resistance. The Valari handlers had discussed him only in whispers. He had been found alone in the ruins of a Terran command bunker, surrounded by 22 dead Mirek, unarmed, untouched. An anomaly, they had said, a curiosity. He stood even now in his containment field, upright, chained, but unbowed. His body bore no burns, no cuts, no distinguishing features. Yet his eyes, when they opened, chilled even the bioengineered guards with their emotion filters maxed. He never blinked. High Broker Run of the Thol Syndicate stood in the observation gallery above, sipping fermented algae syrup from a crystalline coil. "This one's dull," he muttered. "No resistance, no data, no pheromonal spike. Just a hollow carbon sac. Why waste a ship?" The Valari xenobiologist beside him adjusted his vocalizer. "We believe his brain structure is layered with quantum encryption. Neural decay inhibitors prevent psychic entry. His tissue regenerates faster than expected. Also, we lost 3 guards last rotation when his cage door malfunctioned," Rahn scoffed. "And he did that unarmed." The xenobiologist hesitated. There were no visual records, but their spines were shattered cleanly. "No weapons found," Rahn tapped the glass. "Humans, all ego, no output. Earth was always loud. This one is just noise without meaning." In the cell below, Specimen X9. 4-3 tilted his head slowly, as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. His wrists shifted, the chains groaning softly under the strain. Another handler stepped closer. Younger, Mirek, fresh from the academies. He tapped a control panel. "Specimen. Identify." No reply. He pressed again. "State designation." No reply. He sneered. Primitive. You lost. This is your legacy. Chains and tubes and being stared at like a bug. He leaned closer to the containment field. Your kind screamed so beautifully when we took the sky from you. Specimen X9. 4-3 raised his head. Slowly, deliberately. His lips parted. One word. Wrong. The power flickered. The containment field surged, alarms triggered instantly, but nothing failed yet. Ryan stood bolt upright. What did he say? The xenobiologist frowned. He spoke. That is new. Down below, the handler stumbled, back instinctively. The human hadn't moved, but something had shifted in the air around him, an atmosphere of pressure, weight, dread. The transport's central AI engaged emergency restraints across all cells. All except 1X943 remained standing, eyes closed again, as if he had never spoken, as if he had never needed to. Back in the conclave, the celebration was muted. Species representatives filed their reports. Earth had been divided administratively. The Valari held their thinkers and anomalies. The Mirak claimed physical specimens for combat testing and arena fodder. The Thol took vast numbers for neural harvesting and industrial breeding programs. No one opposed. Why would they? Humanity had no allies, no hope, no voice. And yet, across the galactic, a message began to circulate. Origin unknown, source untraceable, a static image, a symbol. Human skull surrounded by chains cracked open, and beneath it the phrase, "Remember Earth." At first the conclave dismissed it, a rebellion, meme slave graffiti. Then the attacks began. Silent, precise, violent. A Thol harvesting ship vanished over 3 systems. A Valari genetics lab reported total biosignature loss. Mirak convoys sent to the outer colonies failed to report. In only wreckage, no survivors. At the heart of each incident was a single anomaly. No ships detected, no fleets, just one signal repeated again and again. Wrong, but that came later. Now on the Vosari drift, lights dimmed, engines slowed. The AI hiccuped, ran, blinked and glanced at the xenobiologist. That was not a drift shift. The scientist was pale. Something is interfering with the gravitic drive. In the cell block, red lights flared. Specimen X943 opened his eyes once more and smiled, just slightly, barely enough to be called emotion. The cameras caught it and transmitted it across the ship and beyond in the Valari core worlds. Grand Arbitrator Zorvel studied the report in silence. He closed the file, turned to his aide. Divert a Class 4, Dreadnought to the Vosari drift. Sir, that is excessive. It is only a transport. Zorvel's tentacles flared slightly. Then it should be easy. His voice was cold, calculating, almost afraid, almost, and somewhere deep in the drifting corridors of a quiet ship, a man who had lost everything and spoken nothing, prepared to show them all what it truly meant to be human, to be wrong, to be the last echo of a world that once screamed against the stars. He would not speak again for a long time. He would let his actions speak louder. They would listen. They would learn. They would beg, but they would not be heard, not anymore, not ever again. The Vosari drift was no longer drifting. It was dead silence rippled through its corridors, where once machinery hummed and chains rattled and handlers barked orders. Only flickering lights remained flickering, but not failing, as if the ship itself were watching, waiting, unsure whether to fight or flee. In cell block 7, Specimen X943 stood alone. His chains now shattered, not removed, but broken, as if they had never been welded at all. Cameras continued to transmit his image, but the ship AI refused to process the footage. Alerts flagged him as both present and absent, his body generating signals no algorithm could translate. High Broker Ran stood in the command module, clutching his communicator like a lifeline. Get reinforcements. Here now static. He turned to the Valari xenobiologist, who no longer stood so straight. Explain this. This was your containment design, your cage, your safeguards. The Valari's voice trembled. He is not what we assumed. He is not a soldier, not an experiment. He is a convergence point, a locus, Everything that was stripped from Earth seems to have consolidated into him. That is nonsense. The xenobiologist looked away as it. The Mirror handler who had mocked him was the first to die. His body was discovered, folded in half, spine snapped so cleanly it looked surgical, his jaw torn from his skull and placed gently at the threshold of the command lift. A warning specimen X943 was no longer in his cell. He had never left it, and yet he was no longer there. No one had seen him move. No alarms had triggered, but the ship began to bleed. Personnel from the inside, one by one, no one saw him coming. Only after Rayan finally had enough. Deploy the Seafrex drones. Lethal mode, full ordnance. The drones activated immediately, shaped like obsidian mantises, their limbs glowing with plasma blades. Their processors scanned every corridor, every bulkhead, every maintenance hatch. They saw nothing until they saw him. He stood at the center of cargo deck 4, surrounded by the floating remains of crushed storage containers and scorched wall panels. He looked up. The drones fired. 14 simultaneous beams of white-hot plasma converged on his position. There was no explosion, just a moment of stillness, and then the drones fell from the air limbs sliced apart. Processors liquefied, security footage played the moment back on loop across the ship. No movement, no gesture, just the man standing still and death blooming. Outward, Ran watched and whispered, "What is he?" The xenobiologist answered without turning. The end. By now the Vossari Drift's emergency beacon had been picked up by the Class 4 dreadnought Vorax Moor, a Mirror warship outfitted with 600 elite soldiers, planetary razors, and a dread core capable of sterilizing a continent in seconds. The Moor arrived in formation, flanked by 2 auxiliary destroyers, its presence enough to destabilize local gravity for kilometers. Commander Zor stepped onto the bridge, reviewing the transmission logs. He watched the footage once, then again, then one more time. He turned to his comms officer. "Launch every boarding team. Secure the anomaly. If resistance is encountered, vaporize the transport." The orders were standard. What followed was not. The first squad never reported back. The second managed one burst of static and a scream. The third fired all weapons within a single second, then went silent. Jaw frowned, tactical. "Lock weapons on the Vossari Drift. Prepare Dreadcore ignition, sir." The operator turned pale. "We have a problem." The main viewer displayed it. The Vossari Drift had moved. No thruster signature, no engine trail, but it was now less than 500 meters. From the Moor's hull, close enough to disable weapon locks, close enough to board, seal all decks. Zor barked, "Full alert." Too late. Internal sensors triggered. Unregistered life form detected on deck. One followed by screams. Then silence. Zor ran to the viewport and saw a man floating outside, in vacuum, staring through the hull. His eyes glowing with an impossible light, a shimmer of distorted energy surrounded him like a personal gravity field. He raised one hand and touched the glass. From the inside, Jaw died never. Knowing how the Vorax Moor detonated 2 minutes later, its dread core consumed from within, rupturing not with a blast, but with a collapse of spatial cohesion. The Vossari Drift vanished into slipspace destination. Unknown words spread quickly across. The Conclave world's panic began to grow. Delegates who had once voted to enslave Earth now held secret meetings, whispering of shadows and disappearances and an unstoppable figure tearing through their fleets. Velari networks were compromised. Mirak. Generals found dead in their bunkers. Thol breeding facilities burned to ash. No witnesses. No mercy. And always the same symbol left behind. The cracked skull in chains. Always the same word pulsing through their security net. Wrong. Grand Arbitrator. Zorvel. Convened an emergency tribunal. Only 30 delegates attended in person. The rest sent digital proxies or excuses. The fear was no longer political. It was biological, visceral, survival-based. They had awakened something. No, not something. Someone, a survivor. Of the impossible. The embodiment of vengeance calculated not in rage but in cold strategic annihilation. Specimen X943 was no longer a designation. He had a name now, given not by humans, but by those who feared him. The scourge of Earth, the living echo, the last word. The tribunal debated contingency plans, orbital shields, neural dampeners, null field Scorvel remained silent until the end, then spoke only once, "We must beg." The chamber went still. "What did you say?" "We must beg." Zorvel repeated, "We must admit what we did. The vote, the eradications, the slavery, the genocide. We must tell him, we must plead for our lives." The room exploded in protest, screaming objections, threats, accusations, but Zorvel only stared at the floor, his eyes hollow, his voice no longer filled with certainty. "He is not a man. He is what we made him, and he is coming." Far from the conclave, in the remnants of a Terran colony now nothing more than dust and ruins, he walked alone, through ash, through silence. He paused at a shattered toy, half buried in dirt. A child's voice echoed faintly from its playback chip. "Happy birthday. I love you." He closed his eyes, a memory or maybe an echo. He knelt, placed the toy gently on a makeshift grave, then stood, a new signal activated from his arm, a beacon. Not to Earth was gone. To Mars, where they still hid the last Terrans. Not many, but enough. He spoke only once into the void. "Wait for my signal." The beacon flashed across the stars. Resistance stirred. Not ships, not armies, something smaller, sharper, human. The galaxy had forgotten what that word meant, but they would learn, and soon. The air on Mars was thin but clean, filtered through layers of terraforming engines and recycled habitats. The last colony no longer called itself a city. It was a fortress buried deep within Olympus Mons, a place few knew existed and fewer were. Allowed to enter, inside the command chamber, General Riker stood motionless, his face carved from war, his eyes scanning the transmission from a satellite that should have been lost years ago. The beacon had activated. The man they once called brother had survived, are we sure? The voice came from Lieutenant Cross Sharp-Lean, with a voice that always carried more steel than doubt. Riker nodded once. It's his signal. No encryption, just one phrase. He tapped the console and the message repeated in that familiar voice. Steady, calm, final. Wait for my signal. Cross exhaled. So he's alive. Riker did not answer at first. Then he looked out the viewport where the red sands of Mars stretched endlessly under the cold stars. He's more than alive. He's awake. In the shadows of the Martian keep, specialists moved with urgency, not in panic but in preparation. Weapons were calibrated, drones charged, armor suits tested and reassembled in silence. They all remembered. The war, the betrayal, the vote. It had not been a battle. Earth had lost. It had been an ambush, a galaxy turning against a world that dared to stand equal. The Conclave had promised alliance and then delivered. Chains. Riker had seen the sky burn as the orbital razors sliced through. Cities seen oceans boil and skies turn black with ash. And then he had watched as one man refused to fall. Now he was back somewhere beyond Mars, in the emptiness between systems, in the dark fold of dead space, where signals faded and engines screamed. Silently through the void he moved. The ship was not his, but it obeyed him, as if molded by will alone, once a Vossari cruiser. It now resembled nothing in any known registry, a shape-shifted construct of re-engineered horror cloaked in gravimetric, distortion and humming with alien silence. He sat in its heart, surrounded by memories, a bracelet made from a daughter's necklace, a cracked visor from his old squadmate, a single bullet etched with the word hope. He did not speak. He remembered each planet he had burned had voted, each commander he had silenced had signed the decree. Every death was balanced against their cruelty, not vengeance, justice. His justice, and yet a part of him paused as the Martian transmission blinked again, showing Riker's face, the same man who had once pulled him from a collapsing bunker on Titan. He whispered, "Still standing, old man." The ship responded not in words, but in trajectory, shifting toward Mars with surgical precision, cutting through space with impossible speed. Mars. Woke defensive satellites flickered on orbital cannons turned skyward. Every AI protocol lit up with red alerts, but none fired. Authorization codes streamed from the incoming ship, layered with deep Earth encryption, decades old, yet flawless. Riker watched. As the anomaly approached the upper atmosphere, his hand hovering over the lockdown switch, then lowering, let him through. No ceremony, no escort. The ship descended like a ghost, touching down on the barren landing field near the crater edge, its surface, hissing as it cooled, its doors opening without a sound. And then he stepped out, not armored, not armed, not cloaked in technology or shielded by drones. Just a man scarred, hardened his eyes, burning with memory. Riker approached without speaking. They stood, 5 feet apart, time folding between them like a blade. "You came back," Riker said at last. The man nodded. "You sent the signal." Riker's voice lowered. "They're breaking. The Conclave, they're terrified. You tore through half their fleets. They're offering peace, terms, concessions." The man did not blink. "Too late." Cross approached from behind. "We need more than war. We need to rebuild. Earth's gone, but humanity isn't. We're scattered but not defeated. You can't wipe out every planet. There has to be an end." The man looked past him at the distant domes glittering beneath Mars's pale sun. "There will be an end." Riker narrowed his eyes. "What is your plan?" The man stepped forward, voice quiet, but absolute. One place left. The core, their seat of power. The last vote, the first betrayal, it ends there. Cross shook his head. "That system is locked down. 10 planetary shields, 1 million troops. AI that rewrites itself every second. It's suicide." The man's face did not change. "I'm not asking for help. Just warning you, when it starts, stay clear." Riker reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to carry it alone." The man looked at the hand, then at Riker. "I already did. For 20 years. Then he turned and walked back to the ship cross. Spoke again, this time softer. "Do you think he's still human?" Riker didn't answer, not with words. He just watched as the ship rose again, slicing into the sky without sound, disappearing beyond scanners within moments. Inside the Conclave core, the last High Council convened in panic. They knew he was coming. They had seen the trail systems going dark. Entire fleets silenced in seconds, outposts found hollowed out, as if time itself had skipped forward and taken only the living, High Speaker Jorak. "Tried to maintain control. We can still negotiate. Offer Earth's reconstruction. Grant them a seat on the Council. A new alliance." No one believed him. The Thol delegate growled. "You want to offer reparations to a ghost. He will not speak. He will not listen. He will kill until nothing remains." Velari intelligence agent transmitted live footage from their remaining spy drones. The image showed the ship now larger, darker, reshaped with every engagement plated with conclave alloy and human steel, bristling with weapons not of this galaxy at its core. The man stood unmoving, watching them through a feed that should have been encrypted. He could see them, and they saw him. Jorak whispered, "What does he want?" The screen blinked. Text appeared. "You know?" Then silence. Panic broke loose again in the chamber. But in one small corner of the galaxy, above a dead moon orbiting a sunless world, something stirred. It was not a fleet. It was not a weapon. It was a message, from one survivor to another. An old soldier on a forgotten outpost lit a beacon. Just one word: ready. And across the stars other lights answered. Not planets, not governments. Men, warriors, veterans of Earth's fall. Each carrying a piece of the fire. They had watched one of their own become legend. Now they would become his echo. The core would fall, but it would not be alone. He would not be alone as the final light faded from the Martian sky. Riker stood alone on the platform, watching the stars. He whispered the name no conclave file dared write: Killian. The war had begun. The core was not a planet. It was a fortress suspended in the orbit of a gas giant shaped like a crown of thorns. Each spike a defense platform, every corridor a kill zone surrounded by mines, hidden gates, and quantum mirrors. It was the beating heart of the conclave, and it pulsed with fear. They had not built it for diplomacy. They had built it for control, and now control was slipping through their fingers inside the high chamber. The last 10 conclave leaders stood draped in robes that once commanded, jaw now soaked in desperation, their voices a mixture of shouting, pleading, and denial. "He cannot get through. We have triple-layered shields. Our fleet is 30,000 strong." One by one, those illusions cracked. One by one, those voices faltered. Outside, the anomaly approached not with sound or light, but with absence. The ship devoured scans, bent logic, and unraveled time. Where it passed, sensors screamed, then died. Codes failed. Missiles detonated before launch. Nothing could track it. Nothing could stop it. It was coming. Inside that living ship, Killian moved through the silence, his steps slow, measured, deliberate behind him. were the relics of his past armor scarred from old wars, a blood-stained banner from Earth's last stand, a small hollow of a young girl smiling and frozen in time. His fingers brushed it once, then never again. In his ear came a voice, low, steady, filled with static and pain. "Confirm entry vector. We are locked in with you, brother. Riker. Not orders, not strategy, just presence." Killian answered with one word. "Ready?" And then the darkness came alive. A second ship emerged behind his, not as elegant, not as terrifying, but crafted with equal fury. It bore no markings, no insignia, but its surface glowed with heat from a Martian core inside. Riker stood armor-clad helmet on, breathing deep with warriors beside him, all of them men who had lost everything and chosen to fight one last time. Elsewhere on the edge of core space, the remains of the Terran Exodus fleet, powered-up engines men, who had fled decades ago, now returned, scarred, worn, rebuilt, some half-machine, some half-mad, but all burning with the same fire. The Conclave's last stand was no longer against one man. It was against all of them. The first shield shattered like glass. Under a blade, Killian's ship passed through with no resistance. The second tried to collapse space and fold his trajectory into a black knot. He blinked through it like it was mist. The third fired antimatter coils and dark energy bursts, all were deflected by a hull that sang with forbidden harmonics and war memories. Inside, the core panic turned into surrender. Jorak, the High Speaker, raised his hand to order retreat, but the exits were gone, sealed by their own failing AI. Their defense systems now saw everything as hostile, including themselves. Killian stepped onto the outer deck of the core without ever stopping. His ship anchored itself to the wall metal, gripping metal as if claiming a prize. He walked forward, boots clanging against alloy, forged from the bones of conquered worlds. 3 guards stood in his way, shaking rifles, trembling. He did not speak, he just looked. They dropped their weapons and ran. He entered the high chamber without permission, without resistance. The doors opened. For him, not because of codes, but because the systems knew better. Jorak stared at him, a tall, spindly creature of the Mathari race, his voice cracking with decades of dominance undone in seconds. "You cannot do this." Killian's voice was not loud, but it was final. "You already did." He raised his hand and the lights died except one that centered on him and the council. Behind him, Riker entered, dragging 2 Conclave generals by the collar, tossing them to the floor like waste. "You remember us," he said, removing his helmet, his face lined with the burden of leadership and rage. "They remember nothing," Killian replied. "Then teach them." Cross stepped in as well. Face unreadable, carrying a data core wired directly to a hacked relay system. "We are broadcasting. Live all planets, all systems. Every world that followed them is watching." Jorak turned desperate. "You came for vengeance, you came to destroy us. But if you do this, you are no better than we were." Killian stepped forward, each word striking like a hammer. "You enslaved children to build your worlds. You drained oceans to power your fleets. You erased cultures because they sang too loud. You voted unanimously to break Earth into dust and call it mercy." He reached into his coat and pulled out the bracelet, the one his daughter had worn before the orbital firestorm. He dropped it at Jorak's feet. She never voted. She never begged, but she burned anyway. Jorak tried to respond, but Riker's fist landed first, sending the alien sprawling across the polished floor. Killian turned to the camera. "To the people watching, this is not war, this is judgment. You can choose now to reject what built your empires or follow them into ruin." He nodded once to Cross, activated the core. Across the Conclave systems, suppression fields dropped. Prisoners freed, riots erupted, old allies declared neutrality, and planets long silenced. Spoke Earth languages again on open channels. Then the last vote began. Killian had reactivated the same protocol the Conclave used. To enslave Earth, each planet, each delegate would cast their decision again. But this time the question was not about chains. It was about forgiveness. And each answer was recorded in real time. Planet after planet voted, forgive, support, rebuild, surrender, beauty. The core itself remained silent. Killian turned and faced Jorak. "Your vote." Jorak raised his head, blood dripping from his lip. "You want us to admit guilt, to bend before the species we once conquered, to rebuild your world with our resources and live." In shame, Killian nodded. Yes, Jorak hissed. Then I vote no, Killian smiled. I was hoping you would. He lifted a beacon from his belt, pressed one button. The ship above responded with a roar. Not with missiles, with memory. It released into the core's systems. The archived footage of Earth's destruction, every betrayal, every execution, every hidden vote, every lie broadcasted into every home of every species under Conclave rule. The truth exploded through the galaxy, and with it, the Conclave died. Not with blood, but with knowing. Riker stepped beside Killian and whispered, "It's done." Killian looked down at Jorak. "No, it just began." They turned and left without another word, the doors sealed behind them, locking the council in their chamber, with the truth they could no longer deny. The ships rose again into the stars behind them. The core cracked not from explosives but from inside, as power grids overloaded and systems rejected the foundation of their lies. The galaxy changed. Killian did not stay to witness it. He was already moving on. Another signal, another world not to destroy, to heal, to rebuild, but never to forget. And in the silence between stars, a name echoed across every channel: Killian. The last vote. The final judgment. Earth's wrath.